Hello, it's Richard Piers from FinextraTV, and we're at Sibos 2022 in Amsterdam. And I'm joined today by Dalbir Sahota from LexisNexis Risk Solutions. Hi, how are you today?
Hey Richard, thanks for having me. Very well, thank you.
Enjoying the show?
Brilliant show. Good to be back at Sibos after a couple of years out.
Exactly, it's good, isn't it? And we're here today to talk about the role of the KYC analyst and how that's changing, and ultimate beneficial ownership. So let's start with that first question. KYC analysts, why is that role changing and what are the drivers?
A couple of areas. I was an analyst myself many years ago, and looking at it from the role that I played many years ago, very much a tick in the box exercise.
Yeah.
And we saw a lot of reforms in the early 2000s with the US Patriots Act, and really sort of steadied the growth from a legislation point of view across the globe.
Yeah.
Bringing more laws around AML compliance, combating terrorism, combating human trafficking. So the evolution of that role has expanded from being tick in the box really to focus on making risk-based decisions. Risk-based decisions substantiated by facts, data, and really bringing that to service. So I think the pressure points the analysts have been under, because the regulation has been very fast-paced moving over the last 5-10 years. And that burden, that pressure, what we've seen, and I'm certainly seeing in the marketplace, is technology is really helping to alleviate the pressure, meaning that actually the analysts have more time to spend on making decisions, whereas historically what they were doing is spending more time collecting data from multiple different sources. So instead of collecting all the data and spending time there, they're really homing in on making better risk-based decisions using data to surface the right insights contextually around what are the key risks out there when they're doing KYC.
I understand. And so then ultimate beneficial ownership, UBO, how is that calculated? What is that? Why is it a complicated structure? Give us a kind of an example, if you will, of the challenge there.
Yeah, I'll start with why it's so important. And why it's so important is what happens is out in the marketplace is UBOs, they're individuals, and they get themselves linked into shareholder ownership of an institution, a company, but they can set several layers, maybe multiple layers away from where the money's really coming in and the cash is flowing in. So they're sitting at the top of a hierarchy. And reason why that's important, it is an individual, and it gives it openness for criminals to be part of that share ownership. And therefore, the challenges around that, one is just transparency of UBOs, because it's not a regulatory requirement for every institution, every company to make that transparent open. Laws are changing that. And I think the other element in terms of how things are calculated, one of the key areas I noticed quite early on, being the analyst looking at this, is that you can have very complex organisation structures. I've seen structures where from the business that you're doing KYC on to the UBO, there could be several layers, 9 layers, and the breadth plus the depth to get to the UBO. Analysts are sort of compounded with lots and lots of data, lots and lots of structures, and it's very difficult to see where that criminality may lie. So aggregated ownership from UBO. So UBO could sit in several parts of that tree, and therefore if he or she is only 1% here, 2% there, may go under the radar, may not be looked at. So the calculation, looking at it from an aggregated point of view, is very, very complex, very difficult to calculate. But that's certainly an area of focus for the marketplace, to really find individuals, and not just the UBO, but understand who they are. Are they a sanctioned individual? Is there any adverse media news against them? Are they a politically exposed person? And more so what we're seeing now is ESG. So looking at it from a environmental sustainability perspective as well. It's not just any adverse media news associated with UBOs or company structures, but an environmental focus and that insight to whether you choose to do business with that particular company or not.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that whole sort of supply chain traceability, wildlife trafficking, and all sorts of areas in ESG, and knowing who is in ownership of that company. It's really interesting to hear you talk about that. So tell us, with the regulation that's changing, how do people keep on top of this, and also, how do they keep ahead of the criminals?
I'd say, in terms of the evolution what we've seen thus far, I think data, technology coming together to help solve for the problem. That's playing out really, really well. So we're seeing less sort of paper-based KYC being done, more platforms and technology being used to help the analysts resolve that pressure point that they've been under, so they can focus on spending great time on making better decisions. I think in terms of looking out towards the future, I think from a regulatory standpoint, financial institutions, non-banking financial institutions, I think there's a need to collaborate more. And I think it's through collaboration where greater transparency emerges. And I think actually there's a lot of insights. And the way I look at it is, at the moment, KYC typically is being done in isolation. And if you can do it as a collective, it's going to allow you to, make better decisions, but fundamentally also find some of the big solutions to some of these big problems. I think there's a lot of AML sort of compliance activity and criminality that goes on under the surface. So through collaboration, it's really bringing that to the surface, because I think as a herd, you can manage the risk better as opposed to in isolation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably one of the most, important areas if, we want to have a sort of better society and avoid the criminality that's out there. So it's such an exciting area to be involved with, and really interested to have you here today talking to us. So thanks very much for your time.
Thanks for having me, Richard. Really appreciate it.